Hi, in this video I'm going to talk through the combat of firing in the game until the bitter end. So in this example I've pulled a chit from the pull chit cup and it's an allied, which means that I can activate one of these counters here, and I'm going to activate this one and I'm going to use the fire action to fire on this one here. And I'll talk you through exactly the process and the steps you need to go to carry that action out. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to declare the firer and I'm going to declare the target to the opposing player. So this counter is going to fire on this counter here. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that they are within range. And this counter here has a rifle and it has a range of 5. That number underneath the name of the weapon is the range in hexes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 hexes away, so it's within range. This German counter here has an MP40, so it has less range than the rifle. It has a range of 3, so 3 hexes. And it has a small number 2, and I'll come to what that means in a little while. But basically, first thing to do is check range, and the rifle has a range of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's within range. The second thing I'm going to do is make sure that this counter has clear line of sight to this counter. And all you simply do is draw an imaginary line from roughly the middle of the counter to roughly the middle of the opposing enemy counter. This is a nice example. It clearly has line of sight through there. There are some things that block line of sight. So for example, a tree blocks line of sight. So let's say if I was there and this counter was here and I wanted to fire upon this counter, I'd be within range, 1, 2, 3, 4, but this tree here blocks that line of sight, so I would be unable to fire from that counter to that counter. But in this example, it's fine. Hedges, which are illustrated by this part of the map here, they can block line of sight. So let's suppose this counter was firing on this counter, that hedge is in the way, clearly in the way, and that would block line of sight. However, if this counter was there in the actual same hex, as the hedge, then line of sight would be fine. So from there to there, they do have line of sight. It's only if the counter is not in the same hex as the hedge is line of sight. So line of sight, absolutely fine. So range is good, line of sight is good. The next thing I'm going to do is we need to determine any modifiers for the to hit dice, and that includes things like being in cover. That includes things like the state of the condition of this counter here. So let's have a look at the modifiers for that. So if the target has a heads down counter, which this one doesn't, but if it did, there'd be a -1 modifier. If the target is in cover, there'd be a -1. So for example, this target here is in the tree, so it gives it cover, and then -1. If the firing has, if the firer is advancing, so using the advance rather than the fire order, this one here has to, I give in this example, I'm just doing a straightforward fire, it's not moving and firing, be a -1. If the firer has a wounded counter, you know, -1. If the firer is under snap fire, so if this has been given a snap fire order, it'll be a -1. Conversely, if the target is in the next hex, so very close range, it's a +1. So in this example, there's no minuses. This piece of cover here only gives cover from incoming fire from the directions of the arc on the hex, so from these edges. This edge here has no cover to it, so there are no minuses. Now, to hit, I would be rolling a single dice, as it's a rifle, and a single dice, and I would need to get a 3 to hit with no modifiers. If the target was in cover, like that one, it'd be a 4 to hit, because it would be a -1. if the target was in cover like this one, and I had a wounded counter on this infantry counter here, it'd be -1 for the cover, another -1 for the wounded, so that would need a 5 to hit. So the modifiers accumulate, they stack up. But in this example, it's a straightforward shot, 3 to hit, no cover, in line of sight, in range. So I'd roll the dice, and if I get a 3 or more, then I've hit the target. Now if I get a 1, that's unfortunately bad luck for this counter here. And not only is it a miss, but it also means that the weapon, the firing weapon, has jammed. And you put a jammed to represent that. That token was infantry counter cannot fire with a jammed weapon, and instead next turn I would be smart if I gave this an action to try and clear that jam. In this example, let's suppose I get a 5 and it's a hit. This counter is now classed as being hit. Before we go on to the next part of combat, I'm just going to talk a little bit about if I got a 6, that's always a hit. So no matter how many modifiers, a 6 always hits. So even if the modifiers meant in theory I'd have to get a 7 to hit or something, a 6 always hits. And the 1, as we've described, it's always bad, it's a weapon jam, and it's a miss, regardless of the modifiers. The other thing I'm going to mention here as well, this is a rifle, it gets 1 shot, and all the rifles in the game get 1 shot. However, there are weapons that get 2 shots or more. So this German counter here is an MP40. It has a range of 3, which is the big number, and then it has a small number next to the range. And the small number here is a 2. And this means that if this counter was firing, it could roll 2 dice, and it's a 2 hit. So this counter rolls 1 dice, it's a rifle, it has no small number, but the MP40 rolls 2. Because it's a machine pistol, so rate of fire is much higher than the rifle. The MG42 has a 4, so that's rolling 4 dice, and the Bren gun over here has 3 dice. So the machine guns tend to have a lower range, but you roll more dice. Now, to go back to this example, clear line of sight, in range, and I worked out the modifiers, there weren't any, roll the dice, got a 5, so that is now hit. So let's move to the next part of the combat. The next stage is to wound that counter. Then you roll another dice, and you need a 4. Straightforward 4. 4 or more. If you get it, that counter is out of the game. It's been killed or incapacitated in such a nature that it's removed from play. So if I roll the dice and I got a 4, a 5 or a 6, the counter is out. It's as simple as that. If, however, I have hit the counter, but on the to wound roll I get a 3 or a 2 or something like that, then I place the wounded counter on them. They've been hit, but they've suffered a small flesh wound, or they're suppressed in some way, and you place a wounded counter on top of the counter like that. At the end of the turn, you roll to see, for all the counters that have wounds on them, you roll to see what happens. Sometimes they can come back into game, sometimes they can be removed from play, or they remain wounded. And that is basically how ranged combat works in the game. Ranged combat is a result of giving the infantry counter either a fire, advance, or snap fire action. The most common would be a fire or maybe an advance. In the next video, I want to talk a little bit about close combat and how that works. But thank you for watching.